This is an exciting time in Scotland's story, and understanding our past will help us determine our future. And when Scotland's voice is heard, it charts the way forward. This is Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond.
Welcome to Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond, where we are broadcasting at the end of the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in our capital city. The title of today's show is Freedom Come All Ye, and we look at whether this festival, which is supposed to be the home of expression and passion and different beliefs, has perhaps been captured to some extent by ideological thinking. Cancel culture has indeed raised its ugly head at this year's festival, where we've had Joanna Cherry, first cancelled at the Stand Comedy Club but then reinstated, and of course the author of Father Ted, Graham Lennon, cancelled twice to then perform outside the Scottish Parliament. We speak to arts correspondent at the Scotsman, Brian Ferguson, to discuss his views on the festival, and of course he's had more festival canopies than there are stars in the sky. We then turn to Baroness Claire Fox and Iain Macwhirter to take their views on freedom of speech and expression in Scotland and indeed across the whole of the United Kingdom. Then of course we have my favourite section of the show, your tweets, messages and emails, and then Alex's favourite section, Scotland's Hidden Heroes. All that coming up soon, but first to Alex, who's interviewing Brian Ferguson of the Scotsman.
And now for an assessment of this year's festival, and in particular this year's Fringe Festival, I'm delighted to be joined by Brian Ferguson of the Scotsman, a 20-year veteran of the Edinburgh Festival Fringe. What's it been like for you?
Oh, it's been brilliant as ever. I've been out every night in the last month, probably looking a bit better than I expected to be at this time, but yeah, it's been a great month as ever. I think there's renewed enthusiasm from the people of Edinburgh for the festival. Really get the sense of that over the last few weeks. And you kind of forget how many amazing venues Edinburgh has, and the different audience demographic for every single event and performance, which is quite astonishing really, that there's so many different age groups and different demographics, and such a range of things for people to go and see. At the latest count, that the Fringe had 3,800 shows on, which was just a fraction smaller than the highest ever year in 2019. So there's been a big bounce back of the Fringe, certainly since COVID.
If I could say, you're quite well known, and probably unusually among Scottish journalists, for being a kind of glass half full guy. So you look on the bright side of the Fringe, but even so, you still think this year has demonstrated there's a lot of life in the festival, and its scale, of course, is enormous.
I mean, it's quite a difficult balancing act, because obviously Edinburgh has limited accommodation. It's very expensive to come here and be in shows and to put them on, and a lot of companies have to take the risk of putting them on. But the demand has been huge since this year and last year. The demand to get way over 3,000 shows wanting to come back. That demand is there, so it's how the city manages that demand is quite tricky. But I think overall that the enthusiasm from artists and performers and companies to put on shows, but also the enthusiasm for audiences to kind of embrace the return of the Fringe has been terrific, I think.
Well, let's talk about the art first, right? Of the roughly 4,000 shows, but it's an enormous number. How many of these are actually new, fresh, novel productions?
I think it's a good question. A good proportion, certainly we look at hundreds of new theatre shows which are here for the first time for our Fringe First Award. And the main criteria for those shows is that they can't really have been seen or performed anywhere before. I think we allow less than a handful of previews. So to be eligible for that, they have to be brand new work. There's hundreds of them every year, and that number has been on a trajectory of just getting more and more. It's actually a bit of a struggle for our panel to see them all, basically. But you know, there are more and more.
I'm sure there are people watching wanting to know how to get onto your panel and see all these performances for nothing. How do you get onto the Scotsman Fringe first panel?
I think the first stage is really getting into a reviewing team, and we are involved in a couple of initiatives to encourage new talent, new writing talent. I met one of our new writers the other day. So that's certainly one way to get in. But I think everyone on the panel has been doing it for a long time, and you know, they are hugely passionate and enthusiastic about the Fringe as well.
Well, let me give you a Fringe first. In the show which I was involved with, produced by Tasmina Ahmed-Sheikh, the Eyes Have It. They were pupils from Craigmount High, from Boroughmuir High, state schools in Edinburgh, Broxburn Academy, state school in West Lothian, 14, 15, 16 years old, who were brilliant debaters. I mean, stole the show from the old stagers. I'm not talking about myself, other politicians and the celebrities. Would they be eligible for a Fringe first?
I think that I've got to be in my bonnet that young people in Edinburgh in particular, but in Scotland in general, should have the opportunity to perform on Edinburgh stages. Now, the biggest one I think that there's a real case for is the Ross Bandstand in Prince Street Gardens, which has seen better days. There was a big stage put up at the start of the by the International Festival, and a lot of young people are involved in that. But I feel really passionately that every young person in Edinburgh, and arguably in Scotland, should get the opportunity to play some part in the festivals. Now, it could be that they're interested in debating, but it could be that there's some brilliant musicians or young artists out there. But also, you know, we could help encourage, you know, a new generation of theatre makers as well, and people to write the plays of the future, basically.
So you think the Fringe is, after COVID and rude health, going on from strength to strength. But let's talk a bit about logistics. I mean, off the 4,000 shows, how many broke even?
Well, I don't know. I'm not running. I'm not taking the risk myself.
But Guy few, I would think.
Well, I don't think we ever really know the full picture on that. I think that the cost, from everyone I speak to, all the costs across the board, from the biggest festivals down to the smallest, you know, one person shows, everyone's costs have gone up compared to 4 years ago. So there's a difficult balancing act with ticket prices to be done there.
So what's to be done? Should there be more public finance invested in the Fringe?
I think more public finance is essential for me. You know, the festivals collectively, their public funding is 11 million, but it has been 11 million in cash terms since the financial crash in 2008-9. So despite the fact that there's been a dramatic increase in costs, you know, that money is worth about more than 40% less than what it was, you know, in 2008-9.
Can you really justify the claim that the Edinburgh Festival is like the equivalent of economic terms a World Cup, a men's World Cup even?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's basically the number of tickets that are sold by the Fringe these days is the same as the men's World Cup. It's as simple as that, really. Now, if Scotland was
the way things are going, I think the Women's World Cup will probably overtake the Men's World Cup. Rightly so.
But with events like the Commonwealth Games and the recent big World Cycling Championships, which were in Scotland, which obviously, when somewhere hosts them, are very much one-off events, there's an investment of hundreds of millions of pounds goes into that. But with the Fringe, it's completely different, you know, and the Fringe and the other festivals, they are really reliant on this £11 million subsidy that they've had, which really needs to be addressed.
It doesn't seem very much, and certainly hasn't kept pace with costs. But other practical things that could be done. I mean, you're thinking about transport and communications. I mean, internally in the city, obviously the trams are there, and there's a few improvements.
Oh, you're a big fan of the tram.
Well, I certainly wasn't a fan of the initial plan, as I think was justified by subsequent events. But you know, usually once trams are in, they get popular and are very useful, of course. You know, getting to and from Edinburgh, I mean, obviously there's been logistical problems because of strikes and all sorts of other things. The cost of air transport is disgraceful, and British Airways certainly don't do anything to help that. If I could just add a wee criticism of BA, but even, you know, within Scotland, I mean, you said, look, there's more people from Edinburgh in the Edinburgh area taking part. But, you know, you'd be guy-pressed to get a bus to West Lothian or East Lothian or never mind Lanarkshire. And there was a lady actually told me that she couldn't come to our show because she had to leave at something like 5 o'clock to get back to her home, you know, somewhere on the west coast. So couldn't it be more done with internal communications and transport within Scotland to increase the catchment area of Scots who could actually come to the Fringe?
I mean, it's easy for me to say, but I think there should be a kind of big collective effort between the Scottish Government, the City Council, all the festivals and all the transport operators to kind of set some serious targets for the next few years in terms of how to improve things during the day and late at night, basically. Because people are out till the early hours of the morning.
I had Mick Lynch debating on my side on the Eyes Have It. We could have done a deal with him if...
Yeah, absolutely. So it's an issue there because obviously, I think in practical terms to have trains running through the night is quite difficult. But my recollection is that happened when COP26 was on. When the numbers of people involved were far fewer than this Olympic scale event that we've got at the moment.
Yeah, and how about thinking about the overall cost of accommodation? I mean, I don't understand how any show can bear the cost of £450 hotel rooms unless it's sleeping 6 to a room or more. But isn't there something can be done about more temporary accommodation? Maybe get some of these barges that are unsuitable for asylum seekers for all sorts of reasons and stick them in the Forth. Yeah,
well, there's one coming here next year. That an American company is bringing. There's a bit of controversy around that. People are questioning the sustainability of that or the environmental impact. I mean, the two things I think would make a huge...
I think you're all right for a couple of weeks. It's after that things get ropey.
The two things I think would make a huge difference are really joining up the availability of student accommodation in Edinburgh that either the universities have or student accommodation providers have built. And we've been seeing more and more of them built all the time. But the big thing that hasn't really happened is to create some kind of affordable pop-up accommodation on the outskirts of Edinburgh and then, bus people in to and from the festival every day. That's something that we do see when there are big sporting events on around the world. Why it's never happened in Edinburgh, never really happened in Edinburgh, I don't quite know. But I think the idea that suddenly demand is going to go down and that the price of hotels is going to come down or other forms of accommodation in the city centre, I think it's a fantasy, to be honest.
And finally, let's touch on an issue that came up, the cancel culture issue with local MP Joe Cherry being threatened with being cancelled and had to take legal action. Graham Lenihan had his show cancelled twice. Even the artistic director of the Lyceum found he had to apologise for some unsatisfactory tweets that didn't suit everybody's cup of tea. I mean, can we really have a festival, a fringe, which was founded on free speech in 1947 in the city of the Enlightenment, contaminated by the cancel culture?
I mean, I think it's all of these things are very complicated. The cancellation last year of Jerry Sadowitz, the comedian who I went to see the other night, and
would you have cancelled him?
Well, the difficulty I think is that freedom of speech and freedom of expression cuts both ways. If you are trying to recruit and hire staff for a venue, they will have their own views, and there will be a mix of views. And if you're I'll take Jerry Sadowitz as a good example. It's a very extreme show, which there are moments which left me very uncomfortable. But do I think that Jerry Sadowitz should have a stage in Edinburgh to perform that show? Well, probably yes. But the reality is, when there's so many venues and events on, it is quite tricky to recruit and hire staff and keep them happy. But the one thing I would say is that freedom of speech and freedom of expression is absolutely fundamental to this festival. And Joanna Cherry was able to do her event. Graham Lenihan was able to speak.
By going to court?
Yes. Graham Lenihan was able to do an event outside the Scottish Parliament. And Jerry Sadowitz performed at the festival this year.
So you think free speech ruled okay?
I think it did. But there's a great debate over cancel culture and whether it exists or not. I don't think that argument has been settled one way or the other this month.
Well, no doubt it will be discussed and debated at future Fringe festivals. Brian Ferguson, veteran of 20 or more Fringe, reviewing many, many productions. Thank you so much for joining us in Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome back to Edinburgh and the Fringe Festival, where cancel culture may have affected some performances, but not the vibrant performances of the pupils from Craigmount High, Boroughmuir High and Broxburn Academy, who were the stars of the show in The Eyes Have It, The Eyes Have It. Let's take a look at them. Welcome everyone to the grand finale of The Eyes Have It, The Eyes Have It. This is debate number 10, and we have a great evening in store for you today. And I'm sure you're going to behave yourself like the audience before you have not behaved themselves. The Nose, led by the Right Honourable David Davis, joined by Baroness Claire Fox, and from Broxburn Academy, 14-year-old Sarah. Please welcome your team for the Eyes, the Right Honourable Alex Salmond, joined by, from Broxburn Academy, 15-year-old Lena. Eleanor Lang.
You're simply the best, better than all the rest, better than anyone I ever met.
I remember a few years ago, as you will, the 2014 referendum campaign, when I was assured by the no side, by people like David, that there was no oil and gas left in the North Sea. It was all gone, it was finished, it was over, it was done with. Last week, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak announces another 150 licenses. Where did it all come from? Magic. The vampire magician who was on immediately before us is responsible for Rishi Sunak finding all that oil and gas in the North Sea.
And he said, we'll see whether we can run our own country. Well, you've had an SNP First Minister for nearly 10 years. How's that worked out? Climbing hospital waiting lists, falling school standards, fraudulent ferries, gentlemen?
Remember Theresa May? Now is not the time. You were in Theresa May's government, weren't you, David? Now is not the time. When is the time? Why do they dictate when the time is? That's for us to decide when the time is for our own vote. Now, in Edinburgh, and I can say that because I do come from here, there is a saying, you'll have had your tea. Their view is, well, you've had your vote. Now you've had your vote, get back to the Spiegel tent and stop speaking. Not going to happen. We're big enough, strong enough, bold enough, intelligent and brave enough to be independent. Make a resounding aye tonight.
We then have Humza Yousaf pushing juryless rape trials. Juries are the basis of democracy. These people do not believe in freedom.
And we are a country of problem solvers. I believe in Scotland, and I believe we could solve the problems that come with independence. So let the Eyes have it. Thank you. Now, this debate isn't about whether Scotland has a mandate for independence or whether we should have a referendum. This debate is about whether we should be independent. And I believe until we do more to convince those who are against it, we shouldn't be independent. Now, I'd accept not being in the United Kingdom, but I can't accept not being in a united Scotland. Until it's clear that the vast majority of Scots support it, I think you should vote nay. Thank you.
I now have to fulfill my role as the impartial, independent chair of the debates. I'm very quick at counting. And the result is as follows. The ayes, 48%. The noes, 52%. I declare, point of order, Mr. Salmond.
To have a count, let's have a real count, not a Tory count.
You can recount as often as you like. I'm the impartial, independent chair. Point of order, Miss Ahmed-Sheikh.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. You may well be the impartial chair, but I'm the producer of the show, and I say the ayes have it.
Well, I know I'm gonna be the man who gets drunk next to you. And if I heaver, yeah, I know I'm gonna be.
And we're going to bow after three. We never get it right. We'll try again. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. And I'm now absolutely delighted to be joined by some of the major stars of the Ayes Have It, and they are some of the pupils from Broxburn Academy. Welcome to Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond to Lena, Sarah and Lucy. Nice to have you here. You're getting lots of new experiences from this festival. Now, before we talk about your experience, let's hear a bit about you. Lena, you're in 4th year at Broxburn Academy, just 15 years old. Tell us what you're studying this year.
So I'm studying English, maths, biology, chemistry, modern studies, history and RMPS.
And that's a full timetable. Any plans for what you might want to study in the future?
I either want to go into law or politics.
Law or politics, that'd be very handy when we come on to talking about the debate in which we're involved. Sarah, what about you?
I'm doing maths, English, business, history, chemistry, physics and French.
Oh wow, right. And your thoughts for the future?
Either business management or business and economics at Edinburgh Uni.
Okay, oh, you've decided university as well. You're an Edinburgh girl. And what about yourself, Lucy?
I'm in 5th year, so I'm doing maths, English, history, modern studies and RMPS.
Okay, so that's your 5 hires this year. And your plans for the future?
Law probably.
Law for you. Okay, so all great subjects and great experience you had at the festival. Now, of course, Robbie MacDonald, you'll call him Mr. MacDonald, your history teacher at Broxburn Academy, actually watched our shows at the festival when we had pupils from Craigmount High and Boroughmuir High performing, and he actually came to me and said, would it be possible to get a chance for our pupils? So he must have come back to the school and spoken to you. Did this happen at the debating club at which you're all members?
It happened on Teams because we weren't at school at the time. It was still our summer holidays.
So what did he say on your Teams chat?
That there was this like amazing once in a lifetime opportunity to speak with some big politicians and that it's like a must do.
Okay, so you were all in there straight away, all the girls. Yeah, not many boys, it was all the girls that came forward, which I was delighted to see. So let's talk about some of the debates. The viewers watching the show will have seen some rushes from the debates in which some of you were involved. Lena, first of all, you came in the very last debate, a very exciting one, high-powered debate because it was the climax. Show Dame Eleanor Lang was in the chair. Tell us what subject you were speaking about and which side of the debate you were on.
So we were doing a debate on whether Scotland should be independent, and I was on the aye side, of course. And I think it was really, really fun. It was such an amazing opportunity to be able to speak with such amazing politicians who I've seen all over the news, and I got to speak with them, and it was really, really exciting.
Were you nervous at all before going on stage?
I think I was definitely nervous beforehand, but everyone was really, really kind and definitely put me a bit at ease. And when I got up there, it was really, really fun.
And what did you think of the result at the end of the show? Because Dame Eleanor Lang, the Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons, was very naughty because you were on the aye side of the debate, and I'm sure you will agree, despite your amazing points, Sarah, that the ayes did win it on the shouts on the night, didn't they?
Yep, definitely.
But what did she say?
She said that the nose had it.
Yes, indeed. Now, Sarah, you were also at that very same debate, and I have to say, and I'm sure you'll agree, Lena also, that you came up with some new debating points for the no side of the argument, no to independence, in the main, which was perhaps not yet. Is that your personal view, or were you a brilliant debater and knew you had to debate that side of the argument, so you prepared to marshal those arguments on the night?
Since we're representing the school, I'm not going to be putting forward my political views, but I won't deny me being a brilliant debater.
Well, fantastic. Now, you must be one of the youngest debaters in the debating club at Broxburn Academy. What does that involve? How often do you meet? Do you debate different subjects?
We meet between once to twice a week. We will do some like more proper work on like strategy and like technique, and then we will also do a debate as well on a different day for practice.
Okay, great stuff. Now, you, Emma, were in one of the debates. Remind me of what topic you were debating.
I was on the aye side for this House would abolish the House of Lords.
This House abolished the House of Lords. Now, I'm sure that you were pivotal in ensuring a win for the Eyes on that night. What was your experience like? You're ever so slightly older, obviously, than Lena and Sarah. Were you as perhaps nervous as they were?
Yeah, I think also because we only found out that we would be doing it that night the day before, so we only had like a day to write the speeches, which was very nerve-wracking. But I do think everyone was really lovely. The whole people that were there did a great job at like encouraging us to like actually go up and do it. So it was overall a really positive experience, but we didn't really know what to expect at first, so it was very nerve-wracking.
Well, you're absolutely all amazingly fabulous at it. So you, Sarah, of course, had a second crack at the whip because you were able to do 2 debates.
Yep.
Did you feel a difference in how you were able to approach it first time round and then when you came out again to that rapturous applause second time round?
I think I definitely gave a better speech the second time because I was less nervous. I wasn't really nervous the first time either, but because obviously everyone was so nice that it kind of made it so easy and fun to do. But I definitely think I was better the second night.
Now, of course, you came out to the tune Rule Britannia, which was played to try and put you off. Of course it was. Did you find that funny?
Yeah.
I mean, did you think that the balance was right? I'm really keen on your views on the show where we had a well-known celebrity chair and sort of politicians on each side and then the opportunity to debate. Did you find that formula worked well for you as young people?
Yeah, I think it was definitely very interesting because there were great politicians on both sides of the House. Like, not to be biased because obviously I was on the Ayes side, but there were great politicians on the Noes as well. So it was just very interesting, like, to be able to speak to them all because you did get a chance before to speak to them. It was very good.
And how important do you think it is for young people in Scotland, indeed pupils at school, to get the opportunity to debate and give their points of view, or as you say, Sarah, not give your own personal view, but to have to debate a side of the argument? How important do you think it is that we continue to create opportunities for you to do that? Start with you first of all.
Yeah, because there's not very many opportunities for young people specifically in Scotland to be able to do these things. So like when you get these chances, you kind of have to leap at them. So it's like really great to see more people like putting forward ideas for young people to like get their voice heard and get into politics and understand it's not all just boring and stuffy and it can actually be a lot of fun.
I think it's you girls that made it fun though. Elena, what about you?
I think really similar to Lucy, there isn't that many opportunities, I think, for young people to really express their views, and I think this was a really fun way to do it because it wasn't really like this kind of hostile politics that you usually see on the news. It was really fun, easy, everyone was really kind, making jokes in their speeches. I think it was really fun and it's definitely an amazing opportunity for young people.
And Sarah, did it give you, obviously everyone has their own image of what politicians might be like in real life. You've got Alex Salmond on one side, former First Minister of Scotland, David Davis on the other side, a seasoned politician, been in the House of Commons for decades. It can be quite nerve-wracking, engaging with these people. Did you find it a very comfortable and easy atmosphere, and did they help you along with your arguments beforehand?
Yeah, they were all so nice. It wasn't like speaking to a politician, it was just like speaking to like a normal person, which I think was like crazy because it's like not how you would expect them to be.
And the audience, of course, it was a late night show, a late evening show at George Square Gardens at the Spiegel tent at the Palais de Variété. So people were rather loud and noisy. Did you find that they were supportive of you though in that environment?
Yeah, I thought the audience both nights were absolutely amazing. Absolutely loved them, and it was such a great like confidence boost hearing all the applause.
And your parents, were they able to, I don't know if they were able to come and see this show or if you were able to tell them about it. They must be extremely proud.
Definitely. I mean, they were able to get to see the show, which was really great because obviously we got free tickets, which was really helpful as well. But they loved it. They thought it was amazing, and because they've never had the chance to like come and see us debate before, because normally it's a more closed-off setting, whereas because this was more open and it was like a show, it was really great. So they really enjoyed being able to watch.
And the same for you, Lena and Sarah. Did your parents manage to make it all? Yeah, of course, you're worried making sure that your mum had got into the venue, which she did. Did she enjoy the show?
Yes, she really loved it. My mum's always wanted to like see like how the debates usually go, because like Lucy said, it's usually really closed off, and usually in like other schools. So my mum was really happy to come and see me like speak.
And yourself, Sarah? Did your parents get 2 chances to see you?
My mum saw it twice. My dad only saw it once, but then my sister also got to see it the second night. They all absolutely loved, obviously, getting to see me speak because they haven't heard me speak in a debate style before, and also because they're all like interested in politics as well. Seeing politicians speak as well is obviously like really fun for them too.
And what subjects, if I was to say to you that we're going to do this again next year, before I ask you if you'd like to participate in it, what subjects do you think you would recommend we debate next time round? Any ideas?
Definitely independence again. I think that's a really fun one. I think it gets the crowd really rallied up.
It does tend to have that effect on people. Any other topics? Because we did independence, the monarchy, the House of Lords, public sector workers' right to strike. Any other subjects that you would add to that from your experience as seasoned debaters?
Not that I can think of. I'd say just more still ones related to Scotland, because well, for us anyway, we don't tend to debate about Scotland. It's more on a UK context.
And yourself, any ideas you can give us?
Not that I can think of. I do think it would be great to have opportunities to do ones that obviously we didn't get to do, like the monarchy. I can imagine that those were really interesting as well. But as Sarah said, there's not many Scotland specific debates that we get to do, because obviously when we're doing bigger competitions, it is more about Scotland and England. It focuses more on worldwide politics.
So definitely debates that are focused on Scotland. Now, throughout the series of debates, of which we had 10, we had of course first of all Boroughmuir High performing, then Craigmont, and throughout the series Alex Salmond kept saying, this is the best school in Scotland, this is the best school in Scotland. And when we got to Broxburn Academy, it was, this is absolutely the best school in Scotland. So I think we would all agree that your performance was absolutely superb, and I'm now going to ask you, if we do the show next year, which I'm fully intending to do, would you like to take part again, girls?
Definitely.
Yes, absolutely.
So you'd be most welcome back. To you, Lena, to you, Sarah, and to you, Lucy, thank you so much for being part of the Eyes Have It and teaching the politicians a thing or two about new arguments, and for being so absolutely brilliant at the festival, and of course for joining me on today's show. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back. Now, in last week's show, we looked at the paradox of fuel poverty versus energy plenty when Alex spoke to Alba MP Kenny McCaskill.
All I can say to people of Scotland, look around you. Look in the hills and see the turbines turning. Look offshore and see the turbines that are coming there, because the first of the offshore platforms has now gone into the coast of the Firth of Forth in the near Nagaith plant. I mean, look around you, see that. Recognise what a terawatt is and realise how little a kilowatt is. You're using hardly any. Somebody is making a hell of a lot.
Then there were the views of economists Graham Blackett and Robin McAlpine.
I actually think the opportunity is bigger than sooner than even Robin said there. I think even from just the onshore and offshore wind, there's the opportunity there for Scotland to generate several times what it needs. And not just in terms of the current electricity demand, but the broader energy demand.
Scotland's so rich in renewables, there's none of them we shouldn't be exploiting. We should just be taking it across the board. The question is only what order we do this in. Scotland's should have a full spectrum renewables strategy.
And now for your reaction to last week's show. Robert Leckie says, all great points and an example of how we should proceed for at least some benefit to Scotland. Let's put the fallacy of once in a lifetime to bed and expose it for what it is. Gavin Wolfie Wilson says, I'd love to watch a show where the Union was held accountable for the stumping of population growth, just like the wealth. I'd like us to look also at power storage for individuals as well as a nation. I'd also like to hear more about community power production, storage, usage and sharing. Kathleen says of both Kenny and Alex, two good men working for Scotland. Indie Boy says, an excellent episode, and it highlights why we need independence. Having people in poverty despite onshore and offshore wind power, along with oil and gas, is a disgrace. Only independence can help us take control of these resources, which will help us erase our poverty. And finally, Jock Burns says, speaking for us all, the dream shall never die. And now to a very special request from Abdulmajid, to ask if he could please replay Pameza's amazing performance at the opening of the Commonwealth Games in 2014. Here she is.
Say, come on, ye, at home we freedom, never heed what the hoodies croak for do. In your home, or the bands o' Adam, we'll find Brit, Ballybree and Painter room. When Maclean meets with friends and Springburn, all the roses and beams will tend to bloom. And a black lad, free on younger, thinks the fair girls o' the burgers done. Say, come on, ye, and hame with freedom.
These were indeed the days for Glasgow and, of course, Scotland. But now, sticking with Scotland, and to Alex's favourite part of the show, Scotland's hidden heroes.
When I was a young member for Aberdeenshire, a very important figure in Scottish life took me on as something of a mentor. His name was Alistair Dunnett. He was the greatest editor that the Scotsman newspaper ever had. And he saw something in me to tell me something about his life and times, hoping that it would help my attitude to politics. In particular, Alistair told me about Tom Johnson. Alistair Dunnett had been Tom Johnson, the wartime Secretary of State's private secretary during the war. He'd been his press secretary. And Alistair told me a wonderful story about how, as press secretary, when they travelled around Scotland, Alistair was under instruction to buy up any copies from any bookshop of a book called Our Scots Noble Families, that Johnson himself had written as a firebrand socialist in 1909, which went through the aristocratic families of Scotland one by one and exposed them for the liars, the cheats, the land grabbers, and the traitors that they undoubtedly were through history. Trouble was, you see, Johnson was inviting these self-same families onto something called a Council of State, which he intended to unite Scotland, to contribute to the wartime effort, and to put into practice some of the plans that he had for changing Scotland even during the wartime emergency. Johnson had been offered the post of Secretary of State totally by surprise in February 1941 by Winston Churchill. It was a stroke of genius from Churchill. There were rumblings of discontent in the River Clyde, that people saw the coalition government as deeply unpopular because of its forcible relocation of women to munitions factories and the fact they seemed to be losing the war. Johnson was the solution to Churchill's Scottish problem. He knew that Johnson, as one of the most left-wing Labour MPs in the Commons, carried great clout with the unions, and he knew that Johnson was enough of a Scottish nationalist to fend off nationalist sentiment as well. And Johnson used this to great effect. He used to boast that his resignation was in his top drawer in his office in St Andrew's House. And if Winston Churchill ever went back on the agreement that he ran Scotland while Churchill ran the war, then that resignation would be put into full use. This stood Johnson in great stead. He was able to put into practice one of the greatest things in Scottish history. That's the formation of the Scottish Hydroelectric Board. And in 1943, he powered legislation through the House of Commons with emergency powers of compulsory purchase, so that the great ambition for hydroelectricity was able to be started, which came into full flourish after the war, when Johnson, of course, appointed himself as the second chairman of the North of Scotland Hydroelectric Board. Bringing power to the Glens was Johnson's greatest achievement. The electricity supply to the Highlands went from less than half to almost 100%. And the hydropower that was mobilised was given back to the people in terms of a hydro endowment. It's one of the disgraces of modern Scotland that that legacy has been privatised and betrayed, and a company like OVO has inherited the customer base of the hydroelectric company, something hopefully that modern politicians should do something about. But Tom Johnson wasn't content just with the huge transformation of the Highlands of Scotland. He formed this Council of State so that he could have his ideas put forward on a cross-party basis. He could unite the nation. He formed the Scottish Council for Development Industry. He had a myriad of ideas to see that Scotland would not just survive the war, but would have the basis to go on and flourish. Johnson's ideas, remarkably for a firebrand socialist politician, came to pass in great measure. He was the most effective of all of the Clydesiders, the radical MPs that Scotland produced in the early 20th century. He was the one who was able to bring his ideas into effect. And as chairman of the Hydroelectric Board, as wartime Secretary of State, as laying the basis for the political foundation of giving, if not home rule in the sense of a parliament, home rule de facto. Tom Johnson was undoubtedly the greatest Secretary of State in Scotland's history, and a worthy addition to our pantheon of Scotland's hidden heroes.
Now I'm still here at George Square Gardens in Edinburgh, but Alex is in the studio in Glasgow discussing with Baroness Claire Fox and Iain Macwhirter in our crosstalk section of the show, whether freedom of expression is indeed under threat.
And now for our crosstalk section of this week's show, I'm delighted to be joined by journalist and commentator for The Spectator and The Times, Iain Macwhirter, and Baroness Claire Fox, the director of the Academy of Ideas. Iain, turning to you first, the Edinburgh Fringe this year has had a number of events which could be termed as part of the cancel culture. How do you feel about that in the home of the Enlightenment?
Well, I'm not too surprised, as it happens, because we've become all too used to this in the Scottish arts and cultural community, if you like to put it that way. We had Joe Cherry's cancellation from the Stand Comedy Club, which he successfully resisted. We had Jerry Salovich banned last year from his second show because some members of staff took offence at it. I gather even you have had some suggestions that there are problematic content in some of your shows that you've been doing from the Scottish Parliament. So this is a very unfortunate development. Obviously, the most striking case was Graham Linehan, the Father Ted author this week, who was successively banned from numerous fringe venues and eventually had to actually set himself up outside the Scottish Parliament. It was the only place in Edinburgh he was able to conduct his fringe show, which was part of a wider show by comedians, I should point out. Now, all credit to Holyrood, actually, for standing up for free speech, because nobody else would. And this is, as you rightly say, the city of the Enlightenment, this is deeply depressing, but it's doubly depressing that this is the Fringe. Because the Fringe was supposed to be where you saw edgy, far-out, controversial comedy, where anything was supposed to go, and where we, in the past, it was always a great defender of freedom of speech against censorship by local councillors, against censorship by the laws and the Lord Chancellor. And right from the start, the Fringe set itself against censorship, and it's depressing to find it's turned on its head.
Claire Fox, you'll be delighted or perhaps disappointed to find out that the reservations expressed on the show The Eyes Have It weren't about you, but about Joanna Cherry. So I don't know how you feel about that. You seem to have passed the vetting test.
Yes, not everywhere, but I'm glad to have done. I think that what's depressing, following on from what Iain says, is that it's, as it were, maybe people from my own tribe, all our own tribe, which are those people who consider themselves to be a bit progressive, anti-establishment, who are leading the censorship calls. And that's what's so upsetting about what's happened in relation to Fringe, that so many comedians, the vast majority of comedians on Fringe, in fact, attacked Graham Linehan, said the show shouldn't go ahead, all were quiet and silent and didn't defend him. That was the other thing that happens with cancel culture. So you'd have thought that, you know, they would be up in arms, because Fringe has always represented a sort of rebuke, two fingers to almost polite opinion, but in the nicest possible way, in a funny, humorous way, and has been prepared over the years to host a wide range of people who were not going to toe the consensus line. But of course, the consensus line now, this is what's so ironic, is that kind of anti-establishment, you can't say that orthodoxy. And I'm afraid, disappointingly, I feel let down that those of us who are, you know, in some way associated with the left in the past and so on, now have to almost apologize for the fact that it's people on the left who were doing the cancelling, because, you know, we all felt very comfortable when it was the likes of Mary Whitehouse, or, you know, those nasty Tories closing people down, or, you know, the big wigs in society not wanting to hear offensive opinions. But when it's our own people who should actually stand in the tradition of saying that every oppressed person needs the right to free speech, that every great social change was achieved because ordinary people had that freedom to argue back, then it's very disappointing that it's that group that are associated with closing down comedy in this instance, artistic freedom more generally, and really being puritanical in what we can and can't hear, see and laugh at.
Iain, can I turn to you about the particular case of David Gregg, the artistic director of Lyceum Theatre, a major playwright in his own right, who seems to have had to apologise, almost debase himself before his staff for what's termed careless online behaviour. I mean, what have you got to say about this?
Well, as a victim of online cancel culture myself, I can only sympathise, except I think, you know, this is a fatal mistake. It's to respond to these attacks online, zealots complaining about something you said, which is perfectly anodyne. I mean, you know, for a director, for someone in his position, of his cultural significance, to be behaving like this, I think is deeply, deeply depressing. And he's also been involved in the controversy about the attempted cancellations at the Edinburgh Book Festival this year on the grounds that it's being sponsored by Baillie Gifford, an investment fund which has 2% of its investments in fossil-related activities. He initially defended that, or rather he defended the sponsorship by Baillie Gifford, saying that they were the kind of among the good guys, that most of their investments, in fact, pointed the other way and were supporting renewable energy and what have you, and that, you know, the arts depended on enlightened sponsors like that. But even he had to kind of retract from that. I think there's I think it's, you know, it's part of the problem here, obviously, is exposure to the internet. And David Gregg has been very prominent on Twitter for many, many years, or X as we're now supposed to call it. And I think too many cultural figures rather like to see themselves reflected positively on social media. They garner lots of love and respect from people who genuinely and generally do applaud the activities of cultural people like himself. But then when it turns a little bit controversial, they take fright. And what they have to do is resist that and realize that they're in a position of authority, and they can't afford, really for the sake of the cultural sector as a whole, they cannot afford to be turned over just by a few people on Twitter who don't like what they say.
Yeah, isn't that a fair point, Claire Fox? I mean, can't people just grow a backbone, like Joe Cherry and take folk to court? Or for that matter, the formidable Tasmina Ahmed-Sheikh, the director of The Eyes Have It, who said to the people groaning and mumbling about Joe Cherry being in that show that there was no Joe, no show. People just have to stand up to this sort of stuff.
Well, I would like to encourage courage and call an arm to people to develop a backbone. But I'm also aware of the fact that it's all very well for me and maybe for others who are involved in politics and have decided to put their head above the parapet and take the consequences. But I don't think you can underestimate the bullying that goes on. I mean, my interpretation of what's happened to David Gregg is because he had the temerity to go against those who were campaigning against this allegedly fossil fuel sponsorship. They then kind of did this going through his Twitter or X account to find egregious examples of tweets where he could then be accused of being a bigot. Now, he's in a very powerful position. The truth is, if he'd have defied them, he might well have lost his job at the Lyceum, because that's what's happening to people. No doubt about it. It's not just a question of saying, grow a backbone, because your backbone will have to know that you will lose your job. Because actually, a lot of these artistic and academic institutions are led by people who really have bought into this stuff. And under the auspices of EDI or DEI, diversity, equality, and inclusion, they will say anyone who breaches any of the kind of suite of rules that you're supposed to sign up to, if you don't, you're a bigot. And David Gregg, although I think he's made a terrible mistake in apologising, I do understand the fear of when they come for you, when they try and get you. The other thing to note, though, is he is a playwright. By the way, a playwright of whom I have a great deal of regard. You cannot be a playwright and go along with censorship, in truth. I mean, if you can go through his Twitter account, imagine if we went through his plays. I'll bet you anything, if we went through what he has written over the years, there will be people who will find things in his artistic output that will offend somebody somewhere, that could be seen or read in the most malign and malicious way. What's going to happen to artistic imagination if we're always looking over our shoulders? And in literature now, and indeed in playwriting, they have these things called sensitivity readers who read artistic works in advance of them being published to make sure that they don't break any of these rules. I mean, this is an absolute outrage. You might as well get the government censoring, because the publishers and the artistic organisations are self-censoring, encouraging careful thinking. But the imagination has to be free and wild. I mean, Scotland, a country rich with brilliant artistic expression, would basically have its great works of art gutted if it had behaved like that in the past.
Would you think that the Lyceum will be putting on Arthur Miller's The Crucible anytime soon, Iain?
I very much doubt it. Nor a number of the other plays that he's been involved in, including Midsummer Dunsinane, The Strange Undoing of Prudence Hart, a musical version of Local Hero. Because what he's said after this, and I don't want to target David Gregg, I understand perfectly well, as I've said, I've experienced this myself. I know exactly what he's had to go through. However, he's made the fatal mistake of going along with it, and not only making this abject apology, but also saying he's going to be speaking with HR, with Human Resources, to discuss making organizational-wide training available to ensure we approach these matters sensitively in future. Now, this is just handing over in his entire institution to a kind of zealot censorship, because we know exactly what will happen, that these people will come in and they will set the ground rules in future for anything that he's allowed to say, or that is allowed to be said by playwrights or anyone connected with the Lyceum. Now, this is just unacceptable. We can't have this going on, because what happened was that he was attacked for saying something which was allegedly transphobic, and I've read these tweets myself. I don't regard them as transphobic or hateful in any sense, in any reasonable sense of the word. And I think I'm almost certain he believes that personally himself, because he's an open-minded individual and always has been. But he's now been driven into this corner, and he's driven the Lyceum into this corner. He is sacrificing artistic freedom on the basis of a few tweets online, which he should have ignored, and his, the Lyceum as a whole should have backed him in ignoring it.
So what's to be done then? I mean, do we need a freedom of speech bill at Holyrood instead of a hate speech bill? Is there a legislative thing that can be done, or can we just call on everybody to be more tolerant and perhaps to grow up a bit? I mean, what is to be done, Iain?
Well, you mentioned the Hate Crime Act. It's not a bill anymore, it's the law. Now, however, the law has not actually been enacted 2.5 years after it was passed. Now, for people who are not familiar with this is the law that makes it illegal to talk hatefully in the privacy of your own home. The dwelling defence, which has always existed in British law to protect what people say in the privacy of their own homes, has been removed by this Hate Crime Act, which will make, anything which is regarded as transphobic, such as these anodyne tweets by David Gregg, these will be regarded as hate crime in future. Now, what has happened is the police, understandably looking at this, have said, well, we're not quite sure how we're going to do this. Do we go around policing everybody's, are we supposed to go for policing people's dinner tables? How are you actually going to impose this? Who is going to decide what hate speech actually is? And all the evidence is, of course, that hate speech definition will be provided by these institutions which drove this movement, which drove the Gender Recognition Reform Act. Another bill which was passed by the Scottish Parliament has actually been it's been halted by the UK government on the understandable grounds that it undermines women's protections under the Equalities Act. But it's the same groups, it's the same government, Scottish government-sponsored trans charities and LGBT lobbyists, Stonewall and others who have contributed to this, backed, I'm sad to say, by far too many people, intellectuals in universities and in the media who should have known better but are going along with this restriction on freedom of speech, fundamental restriction of freedom of speech. So the first thing that has to happen, scrap the Hate Crime Act.
So Claire Fox, can the House of Lords help us out? Can the House of Peers ride to the rescue of Scotland, the home of the Enlightenment?
Of all things that you don't need is the House of Lords helping you out. I mean, I might not be a Scottish nationalist, but I think you should be able to do this myself. I am glad that there has been a stop on the gender recognition bill. I think I might have got that gender recognition reform bill, because I think that there's reasons for that, but that to one side. I don't know that you need free speech legislation, but it is true you have to get rid of that act. But I also think you need a cultural change. I made the point at the Eyes Have It debate that it's in the interest of Scottish nationalists to distance themselves from the fact that one of the great ironies is that in the name of Scottish self-governance, we have a government who is actually behaving against freedom in practically every single instance of legislation it brings in. It's leading the way, and it boasts that it's ahead of the game and more progressive than the Westminster crowd by saying we are harder on hate speech. We're more progressive on gender identity. And I think that therefore, because it's your audience I'm talking to, those of you who actually believe in freedom in Scotland need to start actually having a major campaign in Scotland against these illiberal actions and this mood. So I think it's more cultural. Yes, okay, it would be great to have a piece of legislation that says you have to have free speech, and I did support the government's higher education academic freedom or free speech bill that they brought in recently. But I don't want to be dependent on legislation to defend free speech. This is a foundational value of democracy, and any country that wants to be a modern democratic open-minded, actually, ironically, inclusive country needs to defend free speech. So I would call on you, Ahmed, and your colleagues to really lead the charge on this. Because I actually know many people in Scotland, by the way, who are really worried about the illiberalism happening around them, but they're a bit scared to speak out. They don't have a voice. There's a kind of silencing because you're frightened you'll be done over. But where they see a lead, then they will take that lead. And in the gender critical space, Joanna Cherry in particular, and Women for Scotland and other grassroots organisations in Scotland have been stupendously brave in terms of really taking on this issue in relation to, forget what you think about the trans issue per se, but in terms of saying you should be free to say that biological sex is immutable and that biological sex is not the same as gender and that trans women are not women, that women is a category that should be for women, biological women. These are highly difficult things to say, but they've been brave. So it's those Scottish organisations that I would take my lead from and ensure that it's not just on the trans issue, but on that wide range of issues that we're told are ring-fenced off, that you can't make any comments without fear of cancellation.
Well, that's why we've called this episode Freedom Come All Ye. Baroness Claire Fox, Iain Macwhirter, commentator and broadcaster, thank you so much for joining me on Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond. Politics and the arts, the interconnection between the two is as old as the hills. Now, we borrowed the title for today's show, Freedom Come All Ye, from Hamish Henderson's wonderful internationalist anthem, but also to suggest that, above all, the Edinburgh Festival must be free to all comers, because the Fringe itself, it was formed in 1947 because the establishment were trying to keep out people who wanted to perform at the festival. And Edinburgh, of course, itself is the home of the Enlightenment. So if we think back to the Scottish Enlightenment, I dare say there were lots of folk hammering around, probably ministers of religion who would like to ban David Hume's ideas or ban the ideas that were of rationality that were spouting forth from Edinburgh. I dare say that Adam Smith might have come in for a bit of criticism as well if these unofficial censors had been walking about. And they've been through the course of the Edinburgh Festival and the Edinburgh Fringe through the years since 1947. There's been plenty of Edinburgh Baileys stamping their feet and jumping up and down at any hint of nudity or bad language that they could possibly find in any of the shows. But this has been a beacon of free thought and free speech. Now, Brian Ferguson told us, look, there's 4,000 or 5,000 performances at the Fringe. There's only 1 or 2 examples of cancel culture creeping in. And he's right, of course. This has been an overall success and a celebration of the effectiveness and the range and diversity of the arts. And this has been a celebration of the whole range of the arts and the ideas and comedic performances, the whole kaleidoscope of performances that make up the Edinburgh Fringe. Of course, he's right to put it in context. But equally, Iain Macwhirter and Baroness Claire Fox have a point. If you start allowing cancel culture to creep in, then it's something that can become insidious. So let's all make a declaration that let's keep the Edinburgh Fringe free for people to express their ideas, their thoughts, free for people to go along and see them or not to go along and see them as they choose. Hopefully, let's get the facilities organised so even more people can enjoy this wonderful festival of the arts, of culture and of politics where appropriate. Let's make it freedom come all ye.
Thank you very much indeed, Alex, and I hope you've all enjoyed this week's show. It's certainly been fun-packed. And remember, of course, you can watch us every Thursday at 9 o'clock on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Apple Podcasts, and of course, Spotify. And remember to send in your tweets, messages, and emails. And I'm sure you'll have a lot to say next week about this week's show and our amazing pupils from Broxburn Academy. Until we see you then, thank you so much. Stay safe and join us next week.
This is an exciting time in Scotland's story, and understanding our past will help us determine our future. And when Scotland's voice is heard, it charts the way forward. This is Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond.